proceedings. Good morning. It's lovely to see lots of you coming to join us this morning. I'm going to just let the number get up a bit before we formally start, and I go through how we're going to present to you today and what form it's going to take. Cancellations was never a word really that we talked very much about before March 23 last year, and now it is a word that comes up all the time. So we're revisiting this subject to bring it up to date with the things that have happened recently. Right, I think that 75 people already in. We will start, and as people join. So this is being recorded. It will be put on the PASC UK website so people to view afterwards by the end of the week, and the link to that will be put in the newsletter, and we'll probably put it on Facebook as well. So it is being recorded. We are asking you to use the Q&A box, please. So if you've got questions, pop them in the Q&A box, and we will get those asked to the panel of the three of us at the end. There are going to be no slides today. We're going to try and run through this through examples and questions and interactive style. So that's the way we're going to do that. I'm going to start. Obviously, I need to thank SuperControl. As always, they provide the tech for these things. It helps us enormously. They provide us with data and all kinds of information, which makes us look way more knowledgeable than we ever would be without them. So we're hugely grateful for that. We're also hugely grateful to Stevens and Scown. Robert, Tom and I speak certainly weekly on something or other to help members. So it's a really nice team we've got together today that have worked a lot through the pandemic. So we should be able to give you something to have a wry smile about during the course of today's webinar. So I thank Robert from SuperControl. I'm going to ask him to just give a little bit of a heads up, as we said, sort of, cancellations, December 2021, fuel crises, storms, people catching COVID. How big is this, Robert?
So obviously we've all been through periods with massive spikes of cancellations over the last 18 plus months. I've been looking at some data, as you've pointed out earlier, Alistair, and essentially things are back to normal levels now. So self-catering UK cancellations, it isn't a massive factor the way it has been during COVID. Of course, we've just had the storms, we've had fuel crisis, etc. And some of you on this call will have experienced mini spikes in cancellations, localized spikes, and obviously COVID is still an ongoing threat. But cancellation rates overall are back to fairly normal. I mean, I would say completely normal pre-pandemic levels. Bearing in mind the flip side of that is that demand is still very high, and booking levels are higher than they were pre-pandemic as well. So things are in a pretty good shape at the moment. That doesn't mean that cancellations aren't happening, but it is not the problem that it was a few months ago.
And I think, without asking Robert to show off in any way, that's data taken across £1 billion worth of bookings this year. Is that correct?
That is largely correct. Yes, we've taken.
Did you see the modesty there? Did you see that, everybody?
Well, the reason I said that is because we have processed more than £1 billion of bookings in SuperControl. The vast majority of those, of course, are in the UK, but we do have overseas clients as well. Right. So that's the only caveat on that one.
That's amazing. A modest Scotsman, isn't that marvellous to have on a webinar? The reason I bring that up is, this is not a tiny piece of data on an incidental basis. This is a huge piece of data that's reporting this. So, if you are, suffering, then that's, you may be, we've got members who've been calling from Northumberland and Scotland particularly, who've been really hit hard. But even down here, where we had the storm was bad. I mean, we've had a wall blown over. It has hit everybody, and some guests are reacting differently to others, and we will cover that as we go through today. Just in case anybody thinks the last part of this webinar is going to be really dull, the bit about cookie policies. Can Alistair turn his sound up? Right, how do I do that? Where is I'm trying to find the volume control.
Coming through loud and clear for me.
Out of the system. Can people please send notes in if it's just, is it just one person or is it generic, please? Can we find that out? Can you put in a Q&A, just put good or bad? I can hear. Right, I'm really sorry on that one. I think that it might be a bit of tech we can't solve. I'm really sorry. If you want to ask me any of the questions afterwards that you didn't hear the answer, just give me a call and I will run through it with you individually. So let me go back to cookie policies and why we've stuck cookie policies on here. Cookie policies are like, oh my God, you know, do I have to think about it? Yes, you do, because the rules have changed. There are nasty people who are good at the dark arts of the internet who can track down non-compliant cookie policies and send you a nice little email saying that if you don't want me to report you and you'll get fined and I'll demand compensation, you can pay me some money. And I just would ask, you know, Robert and Tom, just to give me sort of one-line answers. Is this more commonplace than you might imagine, Robert?
I have seen direct examples of this and actually learned about the term cookie troll in the last couple of weeks, which is apparently a thing. Perhaps they live under bridges and spend their time looking for non-compliant websites, but absolutely I have come across exactly as you say, people who have been threatened with very convincing and by all accounts correct legal action on their cookie non-compliance.
And Tom, when I rang you and said, can we do something on this and commission you to do something on it, I seem to remember you weren't that surprised. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we probably deal with 2 to 3 a week, and we've formulated a solution, which is a sort of set letter. So what you receive from these trolls, as you call them, I would be cautious. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. I think some of them have the right intention. Others are using it as a route to revenue. So they're asking for £4,000, £5,000, £12,000 in settlement of this claim. There has been a recent case called Lloyd v. Google, which I won't bore people with the details of, but essentially the courts in the United Kingdom don't really care for distress and inconvenience. It's kind of like, well, you're British, have a stiff upper lip about it and get on with it. And that has now come through. So these people making these claims saying, oh, well, I was terribly distressed to find that my cookies are being used to cross-advertise holiday cottages to me whilst I was also on the now defunct Debenhams website. Well, tough crap. So we've put together a letter that very legally says tough crap. So that's been our solution, because they are becoming almost daily. And clients of all shapes and sizes, which is interesting to see. I mean, we all use cookies, whether you know it or not. All websites use cookies to some extent. Some of them are necessary. So Robert's software will have necessary cookies, because if you want to have a booking on your website, you're going to have cookies to remember who you are, where you want to stay, how long for, or the cost, accessories, dogs, pushchairs, whatever you're going to have, additional booking items. They're necessary. So they're all using all websites are using cookies. So these people have got a huge sort of open market to jump into. And we saw this about 8 years ago, actually, with the forthcoming change to GDPR. There was a similar approach, and it's mostly profiteering. It's mostly people sending letters saying, "Give me £4,000 and I won't shop you into the authorities." And we've seen people make the payments. We've seen people say, "No, shop me into the authority." Sometimes the authority doesn't care. Sometimes they really do care, and the fine is larger than £4,000. But the individually shopping you in isn't actually getting the money from the ICO or from the court. So it's a little bit of a scaremongering tactic to generate revenue for them.
However, having said all of that, having a cookie policy that is compliant on your website prevents huge amounts of hassle, which is why we're going to cover it at the end. Okay, so don't leave when it comes to the cookie policy. and we'll crack on. Right, we're going to go now. We're going to cover cancellations in a post-lockdown era. We're not talking about cancellations in lockdown. We've covered that before. We're going to talk about people wishing to cancel because they have a member of the party has got COVID or has to isolate or has to have a vaccination and don't want to miss their appointment, or they can't buy any fuel because they're not very organised, or the holiday cottage that they are planning to stay in has got no power, no electricity, has got an oak tree drowned in the courtyard. They can't get to it, and what chance do they have of getting their money back? So that's what we're going to talk about: cancellations in a post-lockdown era. So Tom is going to try and kind of do a summary of how they're different. The COVID one is different from the fuel and the storm. So there's no such thing as a blanket easy answer. If there was, we'd just do a one-page paper, send it to you, and you could quote. Every customer's different and every circumstance is different. So you need to listen to everything that Tom is going to say, and then we'll ask him some questions so that you can make sure you get a three-dimensional answer. And then you need to tailor your responses to that with what your relationship is like with your guest, because each relationship you have with a guest, you have a regular guest who stays 10 times a year. Are you going to treat them differently than someone who is giving you a lot of blah on the phone? Yes, you will. Of course you will. So terms and conditions are a backstop. They're a position, your last port of call, not your first port of call. So having said that, I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's from Stevens and Scown Solicitors in Exeter, a large regional top 100 employer, all kinds of wonderful accolades, who we do loads of stuff with. And I'm going to hand over to Tom now, and he's going to try and give you a summary. Then I'll ask him some questions, and then hopefully that will answer some of your questions. Any that we miss, we will cover in the panel. Tom, your floor.
Thanks, Alistair. So I think just first and foremost, before we get into the detail of cancellations and how they might look in various circumstances, Alistair's point is absolutely right, which is your terms and conditions are not the hard and fast line that you have to take in every single circumstance. They are designed to set out the rules of a game, basically. And if you want to play a game, you have to know the rules before you start. So whatever I say about cancellations and how you might deal with cancellations only works if the people who you are booking with have sight of those terms and understand the cancellation mechanism which you have applied. It is no good you, after the event of somebody wishing to cancel, saying, well, this is how we treat that kind of cancellation here, and here's a surprise part of a policy or a document which you won't have seen clearly and easily accessed on your route through making a booking. So SuperControl is a good example of how you can easily do this, because it will integrate in certain sets of terms and conditions, and you can pull things through, and you could what's called shrink wrapping, so people can't actually get any further without saying yes, I've read and agreed to them. But you should also be sending a copy of your terms and conditions by email or in a paper format if you're feeling old school to the people who are booking with you. We also have gone a little bit further, and I know it isn't about lockdown cancellation, Alistair, but during lockdown, we were looking at how clients could better manage the expectations of their guests. And our recommendation is that you have a standalone cancellation section in your terms and conditions, which you can pull out and deliver to your guests at the time they're making the booking, so that they fully well know, for example, if your grandmother dies, regardless of whether it's because she fell out of a train or she had COVID, that is not an event which would allow you to cancel and then claim all your money back. So COVID is now, just talking about COVID for the moment, COVID is a known entity. I think the government are using the term post-pandemic, query whether that's accurate, but let's not get into that. We have got a known situation. So coronavirus infection is not a necessity for you to stay at home if you've been vaccinated. Coronavirus infection is not something which is causing a national lockdown at the moment. So there's no restriction on the free movement of peoples or goods. As a result, COVID in itself and you catching COVID as a guest does not allow you to just cancel and say, well, I'm sorry, it's an unknown and I never knew I was going to get it. So it needs to be integrated into your cancellation policy, which is that part of your terms and conditions, to deal with how cancellations work. You also need to think about how you're going to treat cancellations. Now, I can't tell you the exact way of doing it, and Alice is absolutely right. As a lawyer, I love to say this, it depends. But you should have a sliding scale is probably what you should be doing. So if you have a mechanism whereby if somebody books and they want to cancel, 20 hours after they made their booking, and their booking isn't until August 2022, you're probably going to give them a full refund, because it's very likely that you'll be able to re-let that cottage, that flat, that bunk, whatever it is, by that time. If, however, they're cancelling 48 hours to go, it's unlikely that they're really going to get anything back, because the likelihood of you being able to re-let that property at that time, I would guess, is slim to none. Or if you are capable of doing it, the law might say, well, you should refund the people the amount of money which you've made, so you don't get a double recovery. Query how that's ever sort of measured or found out. So it's a good idea, first and foremost, to set it all out, make it as clear as possible what you do and do not cover. And although you probably aren't able to tell them to get insurance, you would probably say, get insurance, because you are not covered for if you cancel at any notice, and you will lose money. It may be you lose a small amount of money because you're cancelling only 40 days after your booking, or you might lose all of your money because you're cancelling with 48 hours to go before the booking starts. All of this does need to be made clear. I would recommend absolutely layering it on. And I do appreciate people say, well, it puts people off, but I think people would rather understand where they stand with cancellations, given that, and even as Robert says, cancellations now are at a lower level than they have been. We're sort of pre-pandemic, but people are more aware of them, because I think everybody in this webinar has probably, well, definitely seen cancellations, but also been at the other end of that, making arrangements during, Christmas 2020. Let's not forget that was the turkey that never got cooked. So there's a situation where we're all now heightened awareness of cancellations. I think people would be looking for it, expecting it. So deliver it, make it set, put it in your terms, make it separate, make it easily accessible, make it understood, make the recommendation, and make it absolutely crystal clear that you are not going to be covering people in certain circumstances, and give examples of those circumstances. And that's sort of the headline news, I would say. There's a couple of people making some messages on the Q&A about force majeure, and I just want to as much as I possibly can, because I'm a lawyer, so I'll probably make it more complicated, but let me try and make this as clear as I can. So force majeure has two effects to it. Effect one, force majeure is not applicable when you are looking at, is somebody cancelling because they can't get to the venue? That's not force majeure. Force majeure is when they're with you, are you having to stop providing the services? Are you going to have to put them in somewhere else? Are you going to have to give them a refund? How are you going to treat them because of a force majeure event during their stay? So treat the force majeure in sort of those two elements. If they can't get to you because their car's broken down or a pylon has fallen across the road, it is impossible for you to control that situation. And at the same time, it's impossible for them. And consequently, in an impossibly controlled situation, you should have insurance, both you and the guest. The guest obviously having insurance for the booking value, you having insurance for anything that might happen if it was on the edge of your land, for example. The other side of that is, whilst you're providing your services, in inverted commas, which might just be as simple as a 2-night stay in a bungalow in Norfolk, that you should have insurance for if that bungalow, you wake up in the morning and the roof is gone, because there is no certainty that that roof will be there in the morning when you've got storm Arwen blowing. And as a result, you've got no way of knowing if you can continue to provide your accommodatory services. That is a force majeure event. And that is where you may have to refund somebody to the value of the stay which they couldn't stay for. So if it was 1 night and they were on for 7 nights, then it's the 7th, and so on and so forth. But that's going to come out your own pocket unless you have insurance. And I can't recommend or point to insurance, but as a broad principle, bloody good idea, because it will allow you to recover some cost. It's a business decision, of course it is. And you may make a decision about how much you want to refund people, but it goes back to the point that Alistair was saying, which is your terms and conditions will set out the rules of the game. You're inviting these people to play the game, you tell them the rules before you kick off, and that is how it works. It's the same for all of these things. It's the same for cancellations. It's the same for, do we allow dogs on site? It's the same for, is there a trampoline which children can use after 10 p.m? All of these things that people need to know before they get there should be told to them as soon as possible. That's why terms and conditions exist. Otherwise, you could just invite people onto your site or into your house or into a cottage which you've got on your land and just let them stay and run the risk of all the things not going the way you know. So broadly, make it clear, repeat it, tell them you're going to tell them, and then tell them you told them. Does that make sense, Alistair? You're on mute. I hate to say that, Alistair.
I've got about 8 screens here, and sometimes the cursor is somewhere where I can't find it. So my apologies for that. Right, there's a couple of things I'd like to ask you on that, and I've got some questions for Robert as well. Is first of all, the kind of conversation we're having at the moment really only applies if you are in control of the terms and conditions. If you are advertising on a website where effectively the platform is taking the booking, so an OTA booking or an agency booking,
yep.
Those bookings are taken according to the terms and conditions of that platform. So there's a question come in here saying, you know, why are OTAs entitled to charge us commissions despite refunding our guests? That's something that we, you know, is down to the terms and conditions you have signed with the OTA,
Yes.
and the OTA has signed with the guest. So it's extraordinarily uncomfortable. I mean, morally reprehensible could be used as a term, but that's what you've signed up to. So the only way that you can fully control your terms and conditions is by having a direct booking. Otherwise, you are going to find, I've had lots of emails since obviously the storm hit, of people saying, well, the OTAs and the agents are just refunding everybody left, right and centre.
And some OTAs are friendlier than others, and some OTAs will allow you to negotiate, and some OTAs simply won't.
So, you know, you know, you can't change the terms and conditions of a booking that's been made previously. So any bookings that we all have today are not subject to any advice that you might get today, because if you go and change your terms and conditions this afternoon as a consequence of what you hear here, that's only going to affect bookings going forwards. So, you know, it is terribly tricky to get the balance right. The other thing I would ask you about, Tom, is onerous clauses. So, you know, it could be deemed saying that we are not going to refund you if you catch COVID. Could possibly be an onerous clause if you've just got it hidden away in subsection 42B of a 200-page set of terms and conditions. Doesn't this have to be upfront from point of first contact to give you a defence?
Yes, you're sounding like Denning. So he's a famous judgment that Denning made about, it was actually about car park notices, which was the notice that a fine may be applied in the event that you don't pay for the right ticket, or you park across two spaces, or whatever you do, or that your liability is limited if the car is broken into. He said, yeah, there's no point you burying that in a tiny bit of text at the bottom of the payment machine. It needs to be in big. I think he was quite specific. He wanted it in size 12 Times New Roman, bold, whatever he fancied. But the point remains, if there is something which is important for both the operator and the guest, it needs to be made clear at the beginning. And I think, Alistair, I like the example of the train ticket, which I know doesn't always neatly fit, but just take the example of you turn up at Paddington to get the train to York. I mean, there's obviously a limited train service at the moment, and there probably will never be a better one because HS2 has been cancelled in that respect. But if you're to get that train and you turn up at 16:04 and the train was at 1600 hours, they're not going to give you a different ticket. They're not going to give you a refund unless you've paid the additional amount to have a flexible ticket. If you've paid for that train at that time and you don't make it, it's tough. And that's made clear to you at the time of booking. And it's, in that respect, absolutely no different.
Okay, thank you. So that's onerous terms. And then I've got something else. You know, when we had, you know, the webinar we did on this, I think in January or late December, that the three of us did, we talked about, you know, when you get those inquiries coming in, when you get, you know, actually putting right up front. So any inquiry we get at Higher Wiscombe here, we put in there some key questions arising from the COVID crisis. If your booking dates are affected by, and we say that if we go into lockdown or the guest goes into lockdown, we will issue them with a full refund. That is our chosen position. Okay. However, if you wanted to cancel because a member of the party contracts COVID or has to self-isolate, we would only allow cancellation on normal terms and conditions, as these are high street insurable risks. And that is put on every single piece of communication with the guests from the minute they inquire as to how much it might cost to have their booking here. And so far, touch wood, you know, we've been able to hold that line, but it's up front and in your face, not. And some people will have said to us, I'm not comfortable with that. And we have said, well, if you're not comfortable with it, then don't book. I don't want to have an argument with somebody who I said, you know, oh, well, we probably won't apply it to you then if you don't like it. It's our policy. It's our chosen policy. And you have to choose what your backstop policy is. As Tom said, not to use it for everybody, but just to give you a position when someone tries to play hardball with you. How you deal with your great customers needs to be entirely down to you. So there's that, right? The next thing I wanted to cover was, inevitably with all of these kind of cancellations, if you go back to pre-COVID, Tom, Robert, people used to buy something called holiday insurance. I don't know if anybody remembers those two words in the same sentence, but if you looked at what holiday insurance covered, it was poor granny breaking a leg, it was jury service, military service, car breaking down on the way, all of these things. And these are all the things that are out of control of the hospitality provider, which is the point that Tom was making earlier. Those really are subject to the guests having insurance, because you can't stop granny breaking a leg or their car breaking down or called jury service or military service, called to the colours, whatever. You can't do it. So that's not your responsibility. You know, we cannot be the insurers of last resort, but you do need to put this, and that's so obvious that it doesn't necessarily be as upfront as what I've just said about the COVID questions, because this is a much more common sense based thing. Now, Tom will tell me whether I've got this right or not, but you do need still to say it in your terms and conditions that in the event of these kind of things happening that are not within our control to affect, this is what you have holiday insurance for. It doesn't say you have to have holiday insurance, because we're not allowed to say that, but it said this is what you have it for, this is what you buy it for, to protect you against this. We're not going to compensate you for a holiday you can't have for these reasons. Is that balanced, Tom?
Yeah, I think this, going back to that point about a sliding scale. So if people are going to cancel and they cancel as soon as they're aware of something which might prevent their holiday from happening, then they've got a chance to mitigate their own loss. And that ties in with, you know, we have a sliding scale. This is how it applies. That might mean you want to go and get insurance because you might end up being called up for jury service a week before the holiday is due to start. Or exactly as you say, Alistair, an event outside of any party's control, somebody might break a leg or something of that nature. If there's, it's different, of course, as we were saying, in that in this post-pandemic world, if there was to be further restrictions on the freedom of movement of peoples, that is separate. But no, I think I think that's unlikely. And if it was, it would be national. There was a question asked about what if it was regional. I don't think we're ever going to see that again. It was such a mess. It was absolutely unpoliceable. But you just need to make it clear in your terms. And you say you can't force people to take insurance, but they can deduce that it's a bloody good idea to.
Okay, so you know, you can have a robust defence in certain circumstances, and you have not many defences in terms of lockdowns and those kind of circumstances, which we've covered before. So hopefully you're getting a picture of, you can treat a someone not having petrol, not being able to buy petrol, as different from lockdowns. But if you are going to say people can't come because they catch COVID, you still, we believe, need to say that right up front, right from the beginning, right from the point of booking. Lots of people are going to be asking, I haven't had a chance to look at the questions yet, which is why we said we'll deal with them at the end, because we're trying to keep it moving. If you're having cancellations because, for example, people didn't want to come over the weekend because they thought you might not have power, is that, Tom, subtly different from them being on site and you haven't got power? We can cover the haven't got power and unable to provide the service separately from somebody unwilling to travel because of the weather. So Higher Wycombe is open, ready to welcome guests. The storm warning from the Met Office, and they decide not to come because of the weather, and they ring us up and say, where's the dosh?
It's a very rare event, but it does happen, where the Met Office will issue a red weather warning that says, we advise you stay at home, do not travel unless absolutely necessary. In that circumstance, I think you are back into the position with essentially a government restriction, because you are being told by government emanation that you shouldn't leave your home or you shouldn't go into an area where the red warning is applicable. So if, for example, Higher Wycombe was subject to an area which is under a red weather warning, you might at that point be on shaky ground insofar as, well, we're open to come anyway, because you're then contradicting the government advice. If, however, it was an area of South Dorset that was subject to the red weather warning and your guests were travelling from Northamptonshire, then I think that's fine, because you're not asking them to necessarily traverse the red area. But if you're in the red area or they're in the red area, I think that's where you would end up with a difficulty, where I think you'd have to look at, do you have insurance that covers that situation? I know I've seen insurers be more prescriptive around weather warnings, red weather. I mean, as we see the climate being more aggressive in its changes, as we see more red weather warnings issued than ever before year on year, apart from 2018, which had the most, I think. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Okay, so let's now go to the one where, you know, you've got a lovely holiday complex in Northumberland, the power's out, there's no heating, there's no lighting, there's no ability to cook, there's an oak tree down across the drive. That's closed, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's closed. I mean, that's not what people are signing up to. If you had booked a holiday and that's what you were offered when you got there, that you had to walk up the 3/4 mile drive with your luggage to get to somewhere that didn't have any heating or whatever, you probably wouldn't think you're getting your money's worth. So the consequences of that are best served by business interruption insurance, though, aren't they, Tom? I mean, that's not,
unless you've been shrewd enough to very quickly rebrand as an outdoor adventure park, I think you're gonna have to submit that you are not open for business in a situation where, I mean, leave alone the legal risk of you asking guests to climb over fallen trees and the things you would see from a tortious claim, which you do see that happen. The business interruption insurance is what you would have to rely on. Either that, or you don't have the insurance and you just say, I'm going to make a loss, I'm going to have to refund it to people.
Yeah. I would suggest 80% of the calls we've had since sort of Friday afternoon, when this became the hot topic, business owners had, when they gave it some thought, had business interruption in cover that would cover this. So, you know, if you've got, you know, 10 cottages of a going to be closed for 10 days because Scottish Power or North East Power can't put the line back on, that's a pretty clear business interruption claim if you have that part of if you've added that. I don't know that it's always an automatic part of
I think you have to read your policies, dull and as boring and as long as they are, that getting those policies right and making sure your product matches your need is really important. And we do often see that, Alistair, where a broker sells a policy, and there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but the broker then has just gone, or the business has gone for the cheapest policy, because obviously you want to pay as little as possible insurance, because it's often seen for the never. And then when it does actually happen, you look at your policy and you go, I didn't actually go for the full interruption cover. I just went for the bit where we're hit by lightning, and this is a much different. You know, this is a hailstorm which has gone through the windows, for example, something more specific. And the policies, let's be honest, are written by lawyers, so they're written in the interest of the insurer, not of the insured. So you have to read them. You have to make sure you understand them. I now begin to sound like the lady from that Hounsforth Town Council. Read and understand your policies, Alistair.
Yeah. So, I mean, in most cases, we had a wall blown down by the storm, and that's covered under our policy. I spoke to our broker and said, you know, if we had closed, we didn't, the guests were fine, we didn't lose any power, would that have been covered? And absolutely that would have been covered under our policy, obviously subject to the excess that we pay. We pay a large excess at higher Wiscombe, because that reduces the cost of the policy, and we haven't really had very many claims, apart from obviously COVID. But under normal circumstances, we wouldn't claim 300 quid for a carpet. It's better to have £1,000 or £2,000 excess, which reduces the cost by often more than you might claim in a year. That's always been our view. So the first place to look is your business interruption insurance on the storms. The second place is some utility providers apparently do have some kind of limited business compensation for power being out for longer than a certain period.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find out if there's like a government standard for that.
I don't think there is, Alistair, but I have heard of one business that got a whole £50 from a power distribution company for nearly 5 days off.
Yeah, well, we've got one that this week's been offered £500. So, you know, these are calls are worth making. You know, if I could make £50 for a 5-minute call, I probably wouldn't be on this webinar, because, you know, I could earn 2,000 quid. So, you know, you sometimes do have to spend a bit of time investing to find out where you can get some back support for this. First place is business interruption insurance. Second place is utility providers. Okay, other kinds of cancellations. So I'm going to bring Robert in now, because what you've now got also happening is the thorny issue, which we have tried to cover before and is just horrendous, is chargebacks. So even if you have these policies in place, we have seen the credit card companies behaving less well than we would hope. One has to be very careful what one says these days, but not as supportive as they might have been. I think people could probably read between the lines of that. So Robert, looking at chargebacks, you obviously see much more of this because you see the transactions and the effect on them. So any tips to avoid chargebacks?
Yes, I suspect many people listening have never dealt with a chargeback, probably been trading for many years, and then last year have suddenly had to deal with this. As I said earlier, you know, cancellations are not the problem that they were, but chargebacks became a very common way for people to get their money back last year from all sorts of things, not just holiday accommodation. And so people are more aware of it. And I suspect at the back of that it might be a mechanism that's more often used. So really, this is just extending what Tom's been saying already, but specifically with card payments. The first thing is chargebacks often come off the back of the negotiations going wrong. It's the last port of call of the guest. So, you know, the first piece of advice really, and common with what we've been said already, is try not to get into that situation. However, there are a couple of things you can do to protect yourself insofar as possible from chargebacks, or certainly make it much easier to defend them if it happens. The first thing is only take card payments from the lead booker. If you end up with a party where you've got 4 different couples all wanting to pay their portion, and you have effectively a contract with that lead booker, and you've got 3 other people paying, you're opening yourself up to a chargeback from those 3 other people. And that was something that came up a fair bit last year. So make sure, I appreciate that it's convenient for you to split payments to different guests and things, but if you want to protect yourself from chargebacks and it's card payments, then try and get the lead guest to pay. The second thing, and this is something that we implemented during last year, or enhanced during last year at SuperControl, is make sure that at the point that your guest is entering their card details, that your cancellation policy, in particular, that cancellation policy is clearly visible. Ideally, they can't enter their card details until they have accepted that. And that's what we've implemented on our payment pages. Any of you watching who are SuperControl clients, if you go to our help center, help.supercontrol.co.uk, and search for something which I will highlight later when I've double checked it, but Alistair asked me again for that later. Yeah. But basically there's a field now where you can enter your cancellation policy, and that will appear on the payment page. So when the guest is paying, which is separate to booking, potentially at the same time, but separate to booking, they're being given very visible sight of your cancellation policy, as well as a link to agree with your terms and conditions. The key thing is when you're defending a chargeback, the card company is going to want, they are interested in your terms and conditions, but they want to see what the guests saw at the point that they were paying. And if you make it very clear that here were your cancellation policies, we would also then, if you've entered them into that field in SuperControl, then the payment confirmation email also contains a copy of those at that point in time. So you've got a bit of an audit trail to show this is what the guests saw at that point in time. So avoiding or at least helping you to fight chargebacks is all about making sure, exactly as you've been saying, get it right in front of the guest at that point. But specifically for card payments, there are particular considerations there. So I would also sort of count, not specifically about chargebacks, but sort of going on the wider topic of cancellations off the back of COVID, flexible booking is a bigger thing. So while cancellations have normalized again, you know, don't be scared of being flexible still, because it is attractive to people. If you can be as flexible as you can be, then you are likely to be able to charge a premium and get more bookings. So, you know, it is something that you have to balance up to protect yourself, but it is a way of attracting more bookings.
Okay, so we've sort of come round in a full circle to, you know, what I talked about from that first email response that goes out to the guests to, you know, clarity all the way through the comms that these are the terms of cancellation. Robert saying absolutely critical in terms of chargebacks to have that at the point of payment as well. So let's just talk about a chargeback that happens. So you have a chargeback that you think you have a very defensible position, because there have been numerous occasions where many of you, and from the evidence that we have seen at PASC, the chargeback has not actually been legit according to the terms and conditions that you operate, but the credit card provider has decided that they are going to enforce the chargeback and charge you a little sum on top for having troubled them. This doesn't mean you can't go onto the Gov site and take your customer to court to recover the money. So if somebody has charged back wrongly, you can still recover the money. And you know, I'll try and dig out the notes and put that in a newsletter this week or next week, just to remind people there is a way that you can take somebody to court online through the government, through a government portal. Costs, I think, 60 quid, Tom. And if you're really trying to recover, is it more than that?
No, I think it's now 48, but
Right.
it's there or thereabout. Maybe I'm not including that.
And if you're just trying to recover the cost of a booking, this isn't probably something that you want to get. And there's lots of other useful things we can encourage you to talk to Tom about, rather than writing legal letters to individual customers who've charged back. And this is something you can resolve quite quickly and easily. And you just add the costs of the 48 quid and the cost of the chargeback on top of your claim. And you know, when somebody gets a call to court because they haven't paid for their bloody holiday, and you can back it up on the terms and conditions, then in 99 out of 100 members tell me they get the money. But you have to be sure that your terms and conditions were robust enough in the first place to do that, because if you end up in court and they defend the position and your terms and conditions aren't good enough, then you know we're back to this is something that's a #1 priority. Keeping your terms and conditions, your cookie policies dry as it is, get these right, and you won't be having to worry about attending these webinars to hear about how to deal with it. I mean, really, it is that simple. So, Tom, do you think there's anything else we need to cover on cancellations? And we'll get lots of questions which we can ask the three of us at the end. So is that reasonably covered?
I think on cancellations, I would just hammer the point home, Alistair, which is prevention is better than cure. So that's what we've all been saying, and I'm just saying it again so I get the last word in. But I would also just point out that Stephen Scown and PASC have worked together to put together a package for PASC members. So there's that option.
Well, that's what we're going to move on to. We're going to move on to terms and conditions.
I'll be fine.
So here now, the reason, there's a couple of questions. One from a regular member about, do we have like a set of terms and conditions that we can issue out? No, PASC does not, and I will explain why we don't. Every business is different. If you've got an amazing Sleeps 2 on the harbour front in Foy, next door to a Michelin-starred restaurant, you are going to be able to have totally different booking cancellation policies than if you've got what we've got, which is a property that aims to book 20 to 34 people in one booking, which is in a more rural location. If you're in, deepest, darkest Highlands and Islands, you have a shorter season. There are so many different ways that business operators want to operate. You can't have a kind of pick and mix T's and C's. You do need to specify what you want from your T's and C's. So rather than trying to have a blanket T's and C's, which if any changes were made to would probably invalidate the T's and C's, we suggest you get them done. We've negotiated a discounted rate with Stevens and Scown, and I mean, I don't need to tell you how many, Tom, but many PASC members have gone down this route and can feel a lot more confident about their terms and conditions. If you are a member of PASC, we will provide the cookie and privacy policies to you free of charge. Now, if you went to a solicitor to get those done, it would cost you more than your membership. But because we paid for them, we're making that a member benefit. So we're not going to do a T's and C's. It's too complicated. Businesses are just so different from one another and have different ways that they want to operate. Some people, as Robert said, couldn't care less, completely fully flexible. That's their business model. Some people want to have robust it has massive effect on the whole way that you present the whole document. So we would recommend that. So that's what I wanted to say on T's and C's. But they are really important. 90% of the people on this call, I might suspect, because I was one of them once, borrowed some from somebody else on the internet and made appropriate tweaks to make it look like our business. And you know, we all know that goes on. Don't do that, because I didn't check that the person who did it in the first place had it checked, and then I didn't have mine checked afterwards as a consequence. So you've got no protection on your terms and conditions unless you have actually had them looked at properly. We are all lay, you know, armchair solicitors. The one at the bottom of the screen for me, Tom, isn't one, and I'm sure he wouldn't recommend that we cobble them together off other people's websites. Would that be fair, Tom?
Yeah, I think I don't want to scaremonger, but there is an increasing copyright claim situation as well. So if you're lifting text or images from other people's websites, which we do see, and sometimes it's the big boys that do it, you do see OTAs doing it as well. You need to be aware that you're committing a copyright infringement, which has a straightforward claim at court. So you're talking about, Alistair, very simple, straightforward online court claim. You do not want to be subject to a court claim for copyright infringement, because you're going to end up paying both the losses of the other side and the fees that they pay to have it drafted in the first place, plus the fact it probably isn't fit for you because it's not a one glove fits all situation, as you rightly say. So we try and do things in a modular format, and that I'm going to be very naughty, so I'm going to answer one of the questions on the Q&A. So Shirley's asked, how would I possibly, and this goes back to the super control point as well, how would I possibly get my cancellation policy out of my terms and conditions in front of these people if it's at page 12 of a 30-page set of terms and conditions? Well, first of all, your terms and conditions are probably too long, because they may have been cobbled together and they may not have been drafted clearly and efficiently. But also, if they're not modularized, then it's just one long Joycean stream of text. So if you break it up and keep it simple, you can lift your cancellation section out of your terms and conditions, apply it to the super control section, and hey presto, you've also got the bit that goes into your email. You've also got from, you know, so when we do it, we provide guidance on implementation. So some things you can refer to. We recommend you do this. So put it to a PDF and attach it to the email, or make it a link, keep it separate, modularize it through the website. All those sort of things which you can think, well, you wouldn't think about because you're busy running a business, but it's our business to advise you. So it makes sense. Yes, it's costly. You have to spend some money, but
I think I would summarize that by saying, you know, your terms and conditions are effectively another insurance policy.
Yes.
You know, they really are. If you get them right and they're balanced and they're fair, they give you that backstop position, and they're legal. I think that's the point Tom was just making. You know, you can contradict yourself in a long set of terms and conditions where you cobble them together, which is why it's impossible to create like a completely blanket set that you take different bits. It's just too complicated. And this what did you call it? You called it not compartmentalizing, but keeping everything about one subject in one place so you can take it out.
Yeah, modularizing it, and that's something that we do see quite a lot of. So a very common trait for particularly self-accommodating premises, or where you've got multiple accommodations on one site, is you'll have some sort of house rules or park rules or site rules, and people will always try and incorporate them into their terms and conditions. So you end up with jumping between payment is due upon booking, or a deposit of 20% is due upon booking, and you can only bring guide dogs. And you think, well, are these two things linked? If I pay more, can I bring other animals? So there's a story about somebody who brought a parrot, but I won't go into that now. But there's the point is, you've got an opportunity to actually simplify this and keep things separate, so that also you understand it. But if you understand, you have a far higher chance of your guests understanding it, which reduces your Section 71 chargeback claim risk.
So I promise you, my children would absolutely be able to tell you I keep my promise. I promise you there is no back interest from Stevens and Scown if you commission them or not. This is only that we know that Stevens and Scown have done lots of these, have lots of expertise. That's where the recommendation comes from. There is no back commission or anything else. That's not how we work. Right, so that's terms and conditions. Right, cookie and privacy policies. Good to see you're all still with us. That's good. So you've understood why it's a dry subject that we want to cover. Tom is going to just spend a little bit of time on them. Robert's explained that, you know, we're all hearing of people who are being threatened by this. basically the best thing to do is to put up a set of cookie and privacy policies that mean that they don't even trouble you in the first place. So as I said, PASC has commissioned Stephen is going to write these. If you're a PASC member, I send them to you, and then you get your webmaster to implement them. But Tom, what's the hassle? Why is this even an issue?
So if I start with a made-up story, because it's my favorite version of events, which is once upon a time, somebody had read Hansel and Gretel, and they then become a web developer. And they realize that actually Hansel and Gretel leaving a trail crumb through the forest and allowing them to retrace their steps and escape the wicked witch or wolf, or whichever it was now, I can't remember, is a useful mechanism for tracing people's activity across websites. So cookies are born as a breadcrumb trail across websites. This is all completely made up, by the way. I have no idea if this is how it happened. But the trail is set across websites, and it allows web operators, so both your web developer, if you have a web developer, or you yourself, or both, or SuperControl, or whoever is involved in you operating your website, it allows people to track the activity of web visitors. Sometimes that tracking is necessary. For example, SuperControl are going to be operating bookings on your website. They're going to have to take the name, credit card, well, they might take credit card details, third party might, but all of these things are captured, and they're captured so that you can perform your service of taking bookings. The secondary advantage to cookies is you can use it to identify who you should be targeting with advertising. So should you be trying to mirror your market on Facebook, but they call them pixels rather than cookies. Law doesn't care. It's exactly the same technology as far as it sees it. And all of this is personal data, because I could tell you, Mr. Smith of 42 Acacia Avenue has been looking at the Higher Wiscombe website for 28 minutes. And he clicked here and he did this and he did that. And then when he went on to the John Lewis website, he clicked here and he clicked there and he clicked that. And then when he went onto his social media account, we delivered some advertisement to him, which was linked to the things that he'd been looking at and clicking at. Because of the change in data protection law, which I won't bore people with, broadly is huge, the rights all fall down to consumers. So the law is a European-based law. It's all about protecting the consumer. Consequently, the tracking of those people was deemed illegal without a proper, valid, lawful basis. At the beginning of time, when the GDPR was introduced, the valid, lawful basis may have been the legitimate interest of the business. So you as a business would have said, well, it's okay for me to track this person because I want to be able to make sure that I can offer them accommodation at some later date. The reality is Google are probably doing this as well, and they're probably doing it without your knowledge. So they would be using cookies, or you might be using standard analytical cookies, and they'll then be using those cookies to re-advertise other services and other things which they think interest them in due course. All of a sudden, you're outside of the valid lawful basis reason, and the courts and the people who wrote the laws, who, let's be honest, are probably octogenarian at best, and not particularly au fait with the methods and the workings of the internet, just go, right, well, in that case, everybody needs to agree to all cookies ever, except those which are necessary. So you then need this situation arises where you need to distinguish your cookies between necessary cookies, which, because one of the octogenarian judges was a fan of Bruce Forsyth, they have called strictly necessary cookies. Quite what the difference between strictly necessary and unstrictly necessary cookies would be, I have no idea. Advertising cookies, which are the kind of the same, but not the same as marketing cookies. Again, why they're divided, I don't know. And in our template policy, we've kind of lumped them together. Like third-party cookies, analytical cookies, tracking cookies, and anything else that does anything else, sort of an AOB cookie. If you don't have those things in place now, you're technically in breach of the guidance issued by the Information Commissioner's Office, which is guidance in relation to the strict law of the United Kingdom. Thus, you are in breach of the law. That is why you are now seeing all of these people who may be evangelists about the cookie laws and data protection elements of it. They may just, and I'm being cynical, but I'm a lawyer, they may just be making money out of it by saying, give me $4 grand and I'll never dob you in. Which, Alistair, I think you earlier called blackmail, which I can neither confirm or deny as blackmail because I've only ever seen the film Entrapment, so I have no idea what blackmail is. But I would suggest that it's probably a cheeky way of raising revenue, and we've discovered over the course of the last sort of 18 months with a number of court cases, Lloyd v. Google being the most prominent one, that these people can basically do one. So we've had to formulate a response for our client base. We've got that pretty much down now. So again, we're offering a package where if you've received this, don't pay the money, don't entertain them, don't write to them. We will do it, and it will make it more painful for them than it is for you. However, prevention is better than cure. As you rightly say, use the policy that's provided by PASC. Make sure you have a notice. Again, I'm being naughty. I'm answering a question before the Q&A section, but there was a question about, do I need to have a pop-up notice? You need to make people aware of the use of cookies on your website as soon as they land on that website. If you are being egregious and doing it in a way which probably jars with the consumer journey, you might take over your whole website. So you can't get anywhere until you see the policy. But what you will typically see, and funnily enough, if you go to the Information Commissioner's Office own website, you get a very good example of how it would work. It's a banner on the side that says, we use cookies, necessary cookies are tough luck. Strictly necessary cookies are tough luck. Every other cookie is then acceptable or declinable by you. Click here to accept or decline them. What you're typically seeing outside of the government echelon use of it, and interestingly, the Information Commissioner's Office had to find themselves because their own cookie notice wasn't compliant originally. This is amazing, isn't it? Just taxpayers' money going around in circles. The commercial websites that are doing this are being quite snazzy about how they display the notice. So they will say cookies are active, click here to carry on, or click here to agree, or click here to go through to our website. And actually what you're doing by clicking that is you're giving active consent to all cookies. Now, make hay while the sun shines. That at the moment is not deemed an illegal activity. I would suggest that probably within the next 12 months, people are going to be cracked down on that and say, hang on a minute, you're being a little bit devious. There is a thing which I can't remember what they call it, but Amazon are very good at. I think it's called like grey listing or grey guidance. Basically, it makes you think there's only one option when there's multiple. So it's a bit like when you go onto Amazon, you think, well, I've got to have it delivered tomorrow, but actually there's an option to have it delivered by carrier pigeon in 2 weeks' time, which is free. That is something which cookie policy, the pop-up bit, is doing. I think it's probably going to change. And then once it's changed, it will probably change again, because the new incoming Information Commissioner, replacing Elizabeth Denham, has said he doesn't like cookies. But he doesn't like cookies, he doesn't like cookie notices, because he sits on the train every day and has to accept the cookie notice delivered by him by Breach Media and the Times and whatever else he reads. So in short, there's a potted summary of where we are and how we got there. And these people, these freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on your perspective of the situation, are writing these letters, asking for money. A lot of the stuff that they are saying is complete guff and done to scare. Some of it's valid, and usually, and quite rightly, they're picking on the businesses that aren't compliant so that you are properly scared. But the things they're asking for are outrageous. I mean, I'm surprised I haven't seen one asking for a Lamborghini or Ferrari yet.
Well, there you go. Prevention then is the best thing. You know, you've got access to this to put these up, and which would avoid you having to get into these tortuously boring dealings with these people. But if you're not compliant, I mean, obviously they didn't have the same competence as your advice, Tom. We've had people who have ended up having to deal with this rather than being able to just fight them off. So yeah, I've seen people absolutely guarantee that 90% of the people on this webinar today, your cookie policies are not compliant. Okay, if you haven't updated them in the last 18 months max, and make sure they're written by somebody who knows what they're talking about, they won't be compliant. So we're not trying to scare you. They're free, if you remember. We're not selling you anything. Just use them, please. Right. Well, that I think covers the what we want to say there. We're going to go to panel questions now, and I haven't been looking at them because we've been too busy talking. So we've got the force majeure terms and conditions. I'll try and cover that one in a minute. We've covered the terms and conditions with OTAs and stuff, Andrea. If the booking is made on somebody else's platform and comes through to you, you are stuck with what they say. So some of the larger agents are saying, if you get COVID, we will allow you to cancel and refund, and some of them are saying we won't. So depending upon which one you are, the policy could be different. So we always say at PASC, choose your partners carefully. Make sure you understand what that relationship means legally, so that you know what you're getting into. I mean, some of these platforms do an unbelievably good job in terms of getting bookings, but just check what your obligations are under that contract. I mean, any contract you sign with anybody, you should really read it and try and fully understand it. It's that's what we're in business. So you don't have any business protection. You don't have any consumer protection in a business contract. So a consumer has protection against us as a consumer, but you as a business signing a contract with another business, there is no consumer protection. Am I right on that, Tom?
Nailed it.
So if you are signing a contract with anybody as a business, whether it's a platform or anybody else, if they put something onerous in there, all this stuff we talked about, onerous clauses with our customers, doesn't apply. So if they say they're gonna do this to you and take your firstborn, then start wrapping up your child, because they can come and collect. So just tread warily. Business is a hard old world, and we all need to take care on that. So if a guest, right now, this is one I like, it's because it gets asked a huge amount on the PASC email and on the phone. If a guest contracts COVID during their stay and has to leave early, presumably that is their risk. But as a result, you have to delay the arrival of the next guest. They will probably need a refund. Can the cost be recovered from the previous guest, or under appropriately worded terms, or does it require us to insure? Right. My understanding is that you have a changeover period. The updated cleaning protocols, which are available free of charge on the PASC website, enable you to do the changeover in the normal 10 to 4 period, which we do, even if somebody has had COVID in the premises beforehand. Because if you are doing a proper clean and a viricide, you are dealing with the problem. All the rumours that we had about you need to leave 3 days before, that's all never been part of the cleaning protocols, chosen by some to operate on that basis because they chose to, but no legal requirement to do so. There is no legal requirement for you to tell guests that a previous guest at the property had COVID. But believe it or not, there is not a legal requirement for you to do so. Okay, so if you go in and you clean the property and you ventilate and it's ready, the next guests can come in. So I hope that answers that as clearly and robustly as possible. And then we've got a question from Shirley. One of the biggest issues we have is people don't read the T's and C's. Yeah, right, absolutely. Yes, which is why this comment is being made by Robert about having that cancellation clause right up front, the point I said in all my correspondence, so they know these key points. You've got to stick it right, excuse the horrible term, in their face. Or that absolutely applies, Shirley. If your T's and C's cancellation clause is section 27B on page 31, there is no chance on planet Earth that they will have read them, and therefore you get no real protection from them. CMA guidance, okay, the elephant in the room. Short one answer question, Thomas Chartres Moore. Is the CMA information, if I call it that, guidance or law? I know, that's a bugger, isn't it? Go on.
I think the guidance is outdated from memory.
But it's not been through Parliament, so it's not on the statute book. No.
They still do have the discretion to try and enforce their guidance. We're currently in a battle with the CMA about this at the moment. So I have to also be very careful because I don't know what the outcome of that is.
Right. Okay, well, and I'll try and answer it, and you tell me if I go wildly wrong. So the people who are taking guests to court on the method we described earlier, where for non-payment or whatever, some win and some lose. Some courts, some judges say CMA guidance never been near the parliamentary statute book. I think your situation, I'm not refunding them, is perfectly reasonable. And the customer has to pay up, and then you go to another court in another town and the judge says, well, the CMA guidance is on the government website and you should refund them. So it's not crystal clear. No. I would say in most cases courts would interpret the government CMA guidance and all the rubbish that's been put out by DCMS on guidance, which makes it look like law when it is not, suggests that the body of evidence for people, think they would get a refund. So go back to what we said right at the beginning and do what we've been suggesting, and pre-booking, and right at the point of them making the inquiry, right at the point of them booking, right at the point of them paying, explain what your cancellation terms are. And I would suggest you'd have a reasonably good chance of being able to defend yourself on that position if you did not refund them and you'd followed the advice. Is that a reasonable position without you in a conflict of interest anywhere there?
Yeah, I think that if you look at this, it's the same situation with the chargebacks, isn't it? So if you make it abundantly clear to everybody without exception that this is how you deal with cancellations and this is how you would deal with somebody with COVID, for example, and you are making it as crystal clear as possible, it certainly does not detriment you if then somebody goes, oh, well, I'm going to complain to the CMA. Because the CMA would definitely be breathing down your neck, guidance or not, if you've got some terrible muddy set of terms and conditions which you've nabbed from Boots, because it's about, you know, prescriptions being delivered to door, which I have seen. The reason I give it is I have seen it. I've seen businesses relying on completely the wrong thing. Then the CMA will not be happy. But if at least you're trying.
Okay, right. I've got one from Adam, and I really, really do not know the answer to this, Adam. Is it possible to charge guests an admin fee for a failed chargeback? No. I know what my instinct is, but I'm going to hand that over to Tom.
That's a definite no.
Okay, thank you. So it's a clear no, Adam. What is the best wording in terms and conditions that guests must give you the opportunity to resolve problems before doing a chargeback based on those issues? Could you actually have a section of your terms and conditions that says you cannot go to chargeback until we've had a chance to reasonably resolve it, Tom?
You can't force people, but there is a requirement for you not to go to court straight away. That's, again, this is about the balance between consumer and business. That rule about how you deal with going to court is more onerous on businesses and less onerous on consumers, unfortunately.
This isn't court. This is chargeback, which is
just the chargeback. You can ask them not to, and again, going back to the super control, put it in front of them when they're making booking and say, if you are unhappy, don't make a chargeback. Speak to us first. But you can't force them. I suppose it would help you if they then do go down the chargeback route and you think it's unfair, and you go then down that route of saying, actually, we did say to you don't. We did say to you, speak to us first. You can't force them.
I might suggest that you don't really want to put too much about chargebacks being possible in your terms and conditions.
Actually, probably don't want to flag it as a route. Yeah, you probably want to say, if you have any issues, speak to us first.
Yes. Yeah. And always that should be your channel on anything. You know, if you've got, you know, don't tell us if you've got a problem after you've left. You know, make sure your comms are such that they know if they've got a problem that you get given a chance to resolve it while they stay. You know, I see so many people sending stuff into me saying, oh, these people are asking for their money back. They left a week ago and they're now demanding their money back because the heating was good enough. You know, you need to make sure that you've got whole processes in place and your comms channel is open so that you're telling them that you really do need to tell us so that we can come and resolve it. And that's an increased protection. It's not an insurance policy, is it, Tom? But the more that you exercise this kind of language in your correspondence with people to tell us if you have a problem, rather undermines them telling you 2 weeks later that there was no hot water.
Yes.
You know, they would have noticed that on the first time they tried to have a shower. So again, there's a lot of common sense in a lot of this. If you kind of think it through, they need to give you fair time, and you need to be given a chance to resolve. So moving on, this is a brilliant question. How often should you review your terms and conditions, Tom?
Well, if you're a membership organisation, they would probably give you a prompt, wouldn't they, Alistair? I imagine if there was a significant change in legislation or a case that was going to make changes to the terms and conditions that businesses are operating under, if you were some sort of professional association of self-caterers or something like that, they would probably deliver a notification. Then you could make a decision. Otherwise, it's completely on a whim.
Thanks for that. But again, I think, if you haven't reviewed your T's and C's, you really must do. This is an insurance policy that once you've got it right, and until you hear from us in a newsletter that something fundamental has changed and you need to review a section of it, we would tell you, because we work closely with Tom and lots of other people. If there was something that materially meant you had to change your terms and conditions, we would make sure that was broadcast loud and clear. So once you get them right, they will hold until you hear that information. What process do we have when reissuing terms and conditions after guests are booked? Now, you can do this, can't you, Tom? But you need something. You need something magical for this to work, don't you? And what is that you need from a guest if you want to change the terms and conditions?
Goodwill.
And their consent.
Yeah, they're not. You can't just enforce your new terms and conditions without any option from them. So if you do change your terms and conditions for bookings, and you want to retrospectively enforce them, you are going to have to get their consent. You're right, Alistair. If they don't give their consent, they have two options. Option one is return to the original terms and conditions, and they'll carry on having their holiday under the original terms. Or option two is they can cancel, and if they cancel at that point because you've tried to change the rules of the game, you will have to give them a full refund.
Okay. Is that a clear? I hope that's a pretty clear answer. This is why we're saying, if you all rush off this afternoon and put new terms and conditions up, they only apply to the bookings going forward. We have had members who've gone back and changed their terms and conditions and sent them to their customers who booked, and in some cases have had great success in being able to do it. It's all about language and what you're trying to change it to. So again, good comms is absolutely the rule here. Always, we are in the hospitality business. Good comms is absolutely what we have to be brilliant at all times. Let's have a look. I'm sorry if I missed this, but I guess I'm going to isolate and therefore. Right, Annabelle, I think we did try and cover if guests have to isolate. We don't believe it's law that they have to get their money back, but if your terms and conditions aren't explicit on this and you haven't covered it from the point of booking and the point of first customer contact, you may well lose this one in court, is a very short summary of that. You need to give yourself all the tools in your armory, as we'd explained earlier. And if you missed it earlier, Annabelle, just give me a buzz and I can go through that with you afterwards. But you need to be, I used the ghastly terminology again, you need to be in your face about this right from the beginning. And if you do that, you've got to, with a fair wind, you'll battle through. Okay. Right, Adam Stevenson, you are going to get the bottle of whiskey from PASC at Christmas for this one, because if anybody can answer this positively, we will set it out as a landmark case. Has anybody successfully negotiated the agreement with an OTA? I'm thinking OTAs being big boys. I'm thinking Booking.com, Airbnb. Does anybody know? So Robert, you're going to answer this first. Do you know of anybody who's managed to get their Airbnb or their Booking.com contract changed before signing up with them?
Yes.
Whoa! I didn't know that. Crack on, crack on.
But massive brands. So that doesn't help you very much unless you've got tens of thousands of properties. But so the reality is no. But and we talked earlier on about cancellations, particularly and the policies from OTAs, and you do, largely speaking, in normal circumstances, have control over that. You're able to choose the terms of the bookings, what is going to get paid and what isn't. You may be forced into something which is different to a direct booking, but you do have control. Yes, during the pandemic, some of them sort of then went beyond that, but normally they're going to operate within the terms that you specify on the OTA. If you said earlier, if you're going to use these platforms and they do deliver many bookings, then you've got to learn to live with the differences that their operation, and make sure you are familiar with that, because there could come a situation where you think you're going to get X, but actually you're going to get Y.
Again, we talked about this a lot in newsletters and in webinars throughout the course of 2021. If you are on these platforms, you can block out availability in the summer and the weeks that you're going to get these bookings anyway, even if you put a sign up in the local post office. So you don't need to put all your bookings through these platforms at peak periods. Use these platforms to optimize your business rather than be the only option, and then you'll have more bookings coming directly where you
and likewise, we've got clients that have had reasonable success by being completely unflexible on platforms, 100% at the time of booking, no refunds, and which is not a policy that would operate for direct booking. The more flexible you're going to be, the more bookings you're going to get, but you can be stricter on OTAs if you feel like you're vulnerable there. But the reality is the cancellation rates, I don't feel like there's a significant threat there in normal times.
Okay. So have you heard any sort of normal micro-sized business, Tom, getting Airbnb to change their terms and conditions, or Booking.com?
Not Airbnb, but one that shall not be named, do appear to have tiers. So if you go in, and don't forget it's a sales process, it's all patter. So if you go in and you say, well, I want to sign up to you, you're going to get the worst deal. If somebody says to you, oh, you go, oh, I quite like it, they have a slightly different tier where you get a slightly different level of service. I agree, most of the time it's where you've got multiple properties, or you've got a property with significant on value. So you might end up on a longer term contract, but with more flexibility. So you might be signed up for 3 years rather than 1, but you might get more flexibility. So it does happen. There are some of the OTAs have prescribed tiering, if you can describe it as that, where they'll give you a slightly different option if you're unhappy with the first, and it is sales patter. So they're always going to try and get you on the most aggressive first, and then they'll water it down or change some of the things around to better suit you or actually better suit them. So it is possible. Do see it. It's not common. And there's lots of other stuff you can do, which we've just talked about. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Moving on through the questions. Andrew, pop-up wording. I've had a long conversation with my web designer, Ray Pop-up, and ended up going nowhere fast about what the words are. We don't have a template for the pop-up in the cookie policy. In the cookie policy, do we have wording to go on the template?
Yeah, there is some basic wording to go onto the pop-up notice within that template.
There you go, Andrew. You're a fully paid up member. You can go and get it from within the notes. I scanned it to make sure it was about right. I can't remember it in detail because I gave it to my webmaster to do exactly what you should do. I guess is just get them to put it up and make sure that it's all there.
Can I just add one thing to that, Alistair?
Yep.
Just make sure, or ask your web developer to make sure that the cookie pop-up actually works. So if people are clicking no, I don't give consent to cookies, and it's still setting the cookies, because I've seen examples where it has not worked. So it is something that you can think you're getting it right, but actually it's just window dressing.
So the answer there is test, always test. And
Alistair, there are third parties that provide pop-up mechanisms. So if you're a web developer, sounds a little bit like the web developer maybe doesn't know quite what they're doing, can't do it, then you could go to somebody like OneTrust, or I can't think of Cookie Plus or whatever it is, but it's just a plugin that goes into the website, not dissimilar actually to the way SuperControl works, I guess. You plug it in, it works for your website, test it, obviously. Just as a funny aside, funny for me at least, when people say no, they don't want cookies, a cookie is installed to remember that they don't want those cookies.
I mean, honestly, some of this stuff is very dry, isn't it? We did warn you the cookie bit would be dry at the beginning, so you had fair warning of that. Right, I'm just going to go down to the last couple of questions. Our T's and C's. Our T's and C's in that section, however, they are sent out to director. These should be separated to show booking conditions. Shirley, I'm trying to understand that question. Basically, it seems to me that you're sending out all your terms and conditions, whether they're applicable to OTA bookings or not, to people. I think you have to make sure that you have appropriate sets of terms and conditions for each kind of booking that you're actually getting. I suspect that is the answer. Tom, do you want to have a look at that? It's the third question from the bottom, 12:18 p.m. it came in. Can you just have a read of that one and make sure I've understood that one correctly? And I will go on to Anonymous. Please don't do Anonymous. We've asked you not to do this before. We're trying to help. We're not trying to spy on anybody or anything. Can you say in your terms and conditions that the client is the person making the booking, and therefore you are covered by chargebacks for anyone who pays? I suspect the answer to that is an absolute no. Robert is shaking his head. Robert, do you want to add to that?
I obviously don't know the legal nitty gritty, but it's the card holder who issues the chargeback. So if the relatives of the lead booker are the ones that have paid half the bill, and they issue a chargeback, then it is them you are contesting against, and you will have had no, apart from their payment, no interaction with those people, and it'll be very difficult to defend.
No contractual, you see, you've got a contractual arrangement with the lead booker, but you don't have a contractual arrangement with people who subsequently paid contributions towards the total bill. There is no contract with them. So, you know, as Robert said, I know it's tricky. We do large groups, and lots of large groups want to pay individually, and our suggestion is always to them, well, why don't you gather the money together?
Exactly.
Once you've got it all together, you pay something. Much simpler to do it that way.
Everybody send the lead booker a postal order.
I mean, we don't say why. We just say it's much. We try and make it sound like it's much easier for them to do that, because they know they've collected all the money and all the bill has been paid. Because it's really awkward if one of them doesn't pay and we have to dob them in that they haven't paid. We can't really manage that. We don't have the infrastructure. It's a great word, isn't it, to deal with that. So we avoid these payments across large bookings. You know, 16 people paying 250 quid. Oh my God. Too hard, and it has the consequences that have been shown. So did you have a chance to look at that T's and C's question, Tom, from Shirley?
Yeah, so I think I'm right in standing that it's more about modularization of the terms and conditions. So if they are modular, then yes, it's far easier to work across OTAs and then in your own booking terms, because the OTA bit might just be some of the modules and your own bit will be more, or it might be different. And then the park rules, which are applicable to all. Now, I don't want to give the game away and go into distinct, specific legal advice, but your park rules may or may not form terms and part of your terms and conditions, depending on how you operate. They will need to be delivered separately, because they do bind everybody who goes on a booking. So you were just talking about lead bookers, when you're absolutely right, and Robert's absolutely right. The answer is no. But where you've got your rules about how people behave on site, that is. You're trying to make that a contract between you and every person who sets foot on your property. That's different.
Can I suggest one thing I do know is that Stevens and Scown have a parks special legal advice section, which I know nothing about. I'm a very narrow self-caterer. That's all I have any knowledge about. I really think that, you know, to get this absolutely right, you would be well advised to talk to Stevens Scown about their park stuff. You've been sponsoring the park awards for a decade at least. You've got real specialist advice on that, and I think to get this right, Shirley, you need to look at it, you know, properly. It's such an important thing with the number of people you've got coming on board. Caroline Newton has asked a question that I love. It says, I understand that if I come to PASC as a fully paid up member, which is £70 for a single cottage owner, it never gets more than 300, even if you've got over 20 cottages, unless you're an agency. You will give this to me free to my webmaster. Absolutely 100% correct. Plus you'll get access to the buying club, get lots of discounts and lots of other papers that are only available to members. And Luke has asked, how do we get our ICO data controller number? How do they do that, Tom?
So if they're already registered, then it's a case of going onto the ICO register, which you can find by typing into Google or your favorite search engine like Bing the Merciless, ICO database, and type in your name or your postcode. If you aren't registered, you go to the ICO's website and you register. And it costs £45 at the moment. I'm making that high-pitched noise because I can't quite remember the price, but it's around that price. It's peanuts in the long scheme.
Okay, we've got one last question before we're going to round it up, because we do want to end at 12:30, and it's from Charlie and Julia. It's a suggestion that large bookings create their own splitwise arrangement for the duration of their holiday with you. I'm not sure I understand quite what that means. What is a split?
So there are providers out there that will aggregate payments for holidays or any other group purchase. I'm assuming, without knowing the brand, that Splitwise is one of those. But it's just basically saying what you say, Alistair. If you've got 15 people and they're all paying individually, make it their problem, not yours. Yeah. And if there's tools out there to facilitate that for them, then great.
Helps you go Dutch.
Yeah, I will look into Splitwise, Charlie and Julia, absolutely, and see, because for larger properties, I'm sure this is a regular problem of people trying to say, everybody's going to be sending you £200 postal orders. It's a nightmare, and as you've heard, it has consequences as well as being a nightmare, so we need to resist it as much as we can. Right, I hope we've answered as many of the questions as we can. Thank you, lots and lots of questions in today, very, very interactive. I hope you like the format of sort of non-much formal presentations. By all means, ask any of us questions subsequently. We're here to try and help you make your businesses perform as best as they can. I'm just going to tell you there is going to be another small, we're going to do an not open to all businesses, not members only. We did a Zoom for a Zoom meeting where everybody could participate on Hampers and Natasha's law, which went really well. So everybody can see everybody on the screen, everybody can ask everybody questions, and it was really interactive. They are different, they are not recorded because they're Chatham House rules, which means that what's said on there doesn't go anywhere further, so that people can ask proper questions. The next one of those will be open to everybody, and it's at 11 o'clock on the 16th of December. If you want to come, you have to ask for an invite, because you get invited to a Zoom meeting, not a webinar. So I'll put that with the date in the newsletter on Friday and put that on Facebook. That was really well attended last time, and people got really good value from it. So once again, thank you very much indeed, Robert, for hosting and for bringing your expertise and all the data support that you bring us, which, as I said, is completely invaluable. Tom Stevens and Scown, thank you once again. Brilliant, and hopefully people will be looking at their T's and C's and making sure they're protecting themselves going forwards. And once again, we wish you all a safe and prosperous business. Take care. Thank you very much indeed.